Welcome back, you beautiful disaster, ready for another truth they never wanted you to hear. Look who finally picked up the phone. Look who finally made the call that flipped the whole game. You fierce, calculated, untouchable, a work of art in motion. They muttered in dark corners that you were outgunned, outmanned, outspent, outplayed. They hired private eyes, hired lawyers, pulled strings, opened offshore accounts, and mapped every detail like a war plan. Every move seemed choreographed, every exit sealed, every loophole closed. But in all their plotting, they missed one devastating detail. When you push someone beyond their breaking point, past fear, past the need to be liked, and past the desire to play fair, you don't create a victim, you create a weapon. And that weapon doesn't need an army or an arsenal. Sometimes it only needs one bullet. For you, that bullet was a phone call, 3 minutes and 47 seconds. That's all it took to unravel an empire, built on lies, maintained by fear, and protected by money. While they were busy counting billions, hiring stalkers, and stacking their walls of lawyers and threats, you were doing something far more dangerous. You were watching. You were taking notes. Every conversation, every threat, every bribe, every smug moment, they thought you were too frightened to remember. You remembered. You were building a case not for the courtroom, but for the court of consequences. And when you finally dialed that number, when you finally spoke the words they never believed you had the spine to say, their kingdom cracked. They thought money was power. They thought surveillance meant control. They thought fear was permanent. But you saw something they never could from their glass towers and polished boardrooms. You understood that real power is not about how much you have. It's about knowing the exact moment to use what little you've got. It's about understanding that sometimes one perfectly placed truth has the power to topple 1,000 carefully constructed lies. So on that Tuesday morning at 9:17, while they were sipping their third espresso in some penthouse office, counting assets and laughing about how they had you cornered, you picked up a phone that cost less than their coffee and ended their world. Let me paint the scene. They'll never admit. The moment their assistant walked in with that panicked look, the moment their lawyer called with a voice that trembled, no matter how hard they tried to sound steady, the moment it dawned on them that all the money, all the power, and all the carefully paid stalkers no longer mattered. You hadn't fought them where they were strong, you struck where they were exposed, and the most beautiful irony, they trained you to do it. Every time they flexed their power, they revealed their weakness. Every time they sent someone to watch you, they exposed what they feared most. Every time they threatened you with money, they practically handed you a target to aim at. Do you remember how it all began? The subtle threats hidden in legal jargon, the so-called friendly visits from people who somehow knew every step you took, the bank accounts that mysteriously froze, the job opportunities that disappeared without explanation. They wanted you to feel the cold grip of helplessness, to remind you that they owned the board, the pieces and the rules. They had journalists on payroll, judges in their pocket, and more than enough money to bury you in legal fees before you could speak your side. To them you were just another problem to be solved with a checkbook. But here's the one lesson billionaires never understand about people like us. We never had safety nets. We didn't learn to fight in conference rooms. We learned survival in places where money couldn't save you and every move was personal. While they were taking tennis lessons, we were learning that sometimes the only way out is through. While they were inheriting empires, we were learning that when you have nothing left to lose, you become the most dangerous person in any room. So when they sent stalkers to monitor you, documenting your every step and filling their files, what they didn't realize is that each stalker was teaching you how they operated. Every intimidation tactic became another page in their own playbook. For months, maybe years, they believed they had you figured out. Poor little you, struggling to pay rent while they moved millions with a single call. You checking your rear-view mirror for the cars that followed while they sat in air-conditioned offices deciding your fate. They probably even held meetings about you. Can you imagine? Billionaires gathered around mahogany tables, budgeting for your destruction, preparing PowerPoint slides about your weaknesses. They thought they were playing chess while you were playing checkers. But here's the joke. They never realized you weren't playing their game at all. You were studying. Every move they made taught you something. Every pressure point they pressed revealed theirs. When they froze your accounts, you learned the language of financial warfare. When they shadowed you, you learned the patterns of surveillance. When they tried to isolate you, you discovered the power of networks and connection. Every attempt to break you became a free education in how their empire functioned. And with every lesson, you sharpened yourself into the one thing they could never buy, never silence, and never stop. They thought they were breaking you down, but in reality, they were giving you the most dangerous education imaginable. What they believed was punishment became your master class in power. Every threat, every intimidation tactic, every maneuver was a lesson, and while they assumed you were crumbling, you were that quiet student in the back of the room, the one they never noticed, taking meticulous notes not to pass their test, not to earn their approval, but to burn down the entire school they had built on corruption and fear. They didn't just create their own opposition, they funded their own destroyer, engineered their own collapse, and unknowingly signed their names at the bottom of their own ending. So let's talk about that phone call, not the dramatized, polished version they'll whisper about in boardrooms as a warning, not the sanitized version their lawyers will rehearse for the press. The real version, the one where your hands trembled, but your voice cut like steel. The one where every single word you spoke was chosen not for theatrics, not for drama, but for accuracy, for truth. And that was the very thing they never understood about truth. It doesn't need costumes or exaggeration. It doesn't need to be wrapped in spectacle. Truth only requires the right timing, the right audience, and the right delivery. And you, after years of watching, waiting, and surviving, had mastered timing. Who was on the other end of that call? Was it the journalist they thought they had bought, but who still carried a shard of conscience? Was it the federal investigator who had been waiting for the smallest crack in their armor? Maybe it was the family member they had betrayed on their rise to power, the one who had been biding their time for justice, or perhaps it was simpler than that. Just the right person holding the right piece of information at the precise moment when their empire was most vulnerable. In the end, it didn't matter. What mattered is that you knew exactly who to call, because while they were busy tracking your every step, you had been quietly mapping their entire empire, every link, every relationship, every weak point they thought invisible. The beautiful irony about billionaires is this: they create more enemies than allies on their way up. They burn bridges, cut throats, betray friends, and then assume money will keep those enemies quiet. They assume fear will chain people down. They assume power is permanent, and that memories fade quickly. But you remembered everything. You became a collector of their sins, a librarian of their darkest secrets. You catalogued every person they destroyed, every law they bent until it snapped, every dirty deal that left scars in its wake. And when the moment finally came, you didn't need a battalion, you didn't need endless resources. All you needed was one phone number, and the courage to dial it 3 minutes and 47 seconds. That's all it took to release years of silence, years of rehearsed truth that had been simmering in the shadows. No grandstanding, no threats, no desperate bargaining, just cold, undeniable facts delivered with the precision of someone who had been sharpened by suffering into something they never saw coming. You gave names, you gave dates, you gave account numbers, you connected dots they thought were invisible, you pulled threads they never realized were woven into the fabric of their empire. And the person on the other end, they had been waiting for that call, praying someone would finally step forward with the courage to say what everyone else was too afraid to. That phone call wasn't just an act of defiance, it was ignition. You weren't merely making contact, you were lighting a fuse they themselves had built, laid and wired through every corrupt decision and every arrogant misstep. And when you struck the match with your words, all you had to do was step back and watch what they had constructed burn from the inside out. The first domino toppled within hours. Maybe it was a frozen account that locked up millions they thought untouchable. Maybe it was a federal subpoena sliding across a polished desk. Or maybe it was just a reporter asking questions that were never supposed to see daylight. Whatever the trigger, they felt it instantly, that subtle shift in the air, that drop in temperature that tells you the storm has finally arrived. Their phones started buzzing with the wrong kinds of calls. Their lawyers, usually so smug and confident, began to sound uncertain. Their allies suddenly discovered scheduling conflicts. The once immovable kingdom they had built on intimidation and silence began to tremble, all because someone was finally no longer afraid, and that someone was you. You have to understand the psychological earthquake you unleashed. These people had lived their entire lives wrapped in the illusion that money was the ultimate shield. To them, enough zeros in a bank account meant immunity. They had bought their way out of every consequence, silenced every scandal with payouts, buried every threat under mountains of cash. They moved through the world like untouchable predators, convinced that rules applied only to others. And then you showed up, you with your ordinary phone, your so-called ordinary life, and an extraordinary refusal to be intimidated. You shattered the illusion they thought was permanent. Suddenly the stalkers they had paid to shadow you began calling in sick. Isn't it funny how that works? When the ship begins to sink, even the rats scramble to escape. The investigators who had once documented your every step quietly shifted their focus elsewhere. The lawyers who once sent you letter after letter dripping with threats now whispered about settlement options and damage control. The grand machinery they had built to crush you began sputtering, not because it broke, but because machinery requires people to run it, and people can smell when the wind has shifted. They had intimidated hundreds, maybe thousands, into silence, but they had never encountered someone who didn't just survive intimidation, but transformed it into education. You flipped their tactics into lessons, and those lessons became your arsenal. Watch how quickly billions lose their power when the right questions start being asked by the right people. Watch how fast their empire of fear evaporates the moment light shines on the shadows they depended on. Now they are scrambling somewhere. They are in full-blown damage control, throwing money at the problem like it's always worked before. But here's the truth they can't afford to face. Truth itself is the most expensive thing to bury, and the one thing they can never kill. Every dollar they spend trying to contain what you set in motion doesn't erase the trail, it creates more of it, more receipts, more signatures, more evidence. They are digging themselves deeper with every frantic move, while you stand steady knowing the one thing they never could buy, the courage to stop being afraid. Every person they tried to silence is now a ticking echo in the air, each one a potential phone call waiting to shatter their fragile illusion of control. For years they buried voices with payouts, buried scandals with influence, and buried truth with intimidation. But the more they buried, the more graves they dug for themselves, and now every silenced voice has become another ghost in the system, another witness ready to rise. The moment someone brave enough connects the dots, that someone was you. Every desperate move they make now doesn't weaken your truth, it confirms it. Each frantic denial, each sudden no comment, each backdoor meeting and damage control email is just another receipt, stamped with proof that everything you revealed was real. You didn't just make a phone call that morning, you triggered something bigger. You started an avalanche, and avalanches don't care about Swiss accounts or offshore vaults. They don't care about PR teams, handlers, or carefully manicured reputations. Avalanches are indifferent. They bury everything indiscriminately, crushing mountains that once seemed eternal. That's what your phone call became, a force of nature impossible to reverse, impossible to bargain with. And now they aren't sleeping well anymore, are they? Nights that used to stretch in comfort now hang heavy with dread. Egyptian cotton sheets on their California king beds feel like chains of silk, suffocating instead of soothing. Every creak of the floorboards, every vibration of their phones feels like the sound of another shoe dropping. Their palaces of luxury have turned into gilded cages. The personal chefs plating their extravagant meals do so for people who push food away, untouched, their appetites swallowed by anxiety. Even their private jets, fueled and ready, have lost their magic. Because where do you run when the storm follows you everywhere? Where do you escape when the enemy is not an army, but the truth itself? That's what you did to them. You reminded them what fear feels like. You made predators taste their own poison. You made monsters remember they bleed. For decades they moved through this world, like gods among mortals, buying silence, buying loyalty, buying invisibility. And yet all it took was one ordinary person, with extraordinary courage to strip it all away. Unlike them, you didn't need a committee, a board, or a legion of mercenaries to accomplish it. You needed only your will, your timing, and the understanding that truth is the sharpest weapon in any room. This is the lesson they don't put in textbooks, the one business schools don't dare to whisper. Real power doesn't come from what you can build, it comes from what you can dismantle with a single revelation. They thought they had built something permanent, elaborate lies layered into complex structures, networks of corruption reinforced by bribes and blackmail. They had politicians in their pockets, police chiefs on payroll, journalists on retainer, and judges in their debt. They were convinced their machine was invincible, a fortress too big to fail, but you saw what they didn't. You understood the universal law. Every lie is a debt that must eventually be paid. Every crime creates evidence, no matter how carefully concealed. Every betrayal plants the seed of an enemy who waits for the day justice will find them, and you became the one who united those debts, those seeds, those fragments of truth. Their strength was their money, but money blinds. Your strength was memory, and memory never forgets. Now their world is unraveling in real time. The phones in their offices ring constantly, but not with opportunity or congratulations. They ring with investors demanding answers, with partners reconsidering contracts, with board members asking questions they can't afford to answer. The same name that once opened every door now makes people hesitate. It makes powerful allies suddenly take a step back. Invitations to charity galas vanish, exclusive events forget to include them. Magazines that once featured their faces on glossy covers now redesign layouts to showcase someone else. Their currency of influence is collapsing, and no bailout can save it. Because here's the truth, they can't outrun. Money can buy silence, but it cannot buy back. Trust, money can delay exposure, but it cannot erase it. Money can purchase applause, but it cannot purchase respect once it's been burned to ashes. The truth, once revealed, cannot be unknown. The whispers spread, the headlines echo, and the image they worked decades to sculpt shatters in seconds, and everyone knows exactly where the crack began. And here lies the part that twists the knife the deepest. They know it was you, one person, one phone call, one moment of perfect, devastating clarity. You set the fuse, you lit the spark, and you walked away while their empire started to cave in on itself. But what unsettles them most isn't just the collapse, it's the silence that follows. You're not gloating, you're not giving interviews, not taking victory laps, not chasing cameras. You didn't turn your strike into a spectacle. You left them to choke on their own unraveling, knowing the world sees them falling without you ever needing to point. That's the cruelest irony of all. They can't spin this into a battle. They can't say they were defeated in combat. because you never fought them where they were strong. You didn't even give them the satisfaction of resistance. You simply turned their own weight against them, and now they're left with the unbearable truth that everything they built, everything they bought, everything they used to protect themselves was powerless against one thing: you refusing to stay silent. You're not out here writing tell-all books, sitting under studio lights, or running podcasts to squeeze fame out of your story. You didn't turn this into a press tour or a Netflix special. You didn't sell your soul to cash in on revenge. You made your call, and then you simply went back to your life. And that, more than anything else, terrifies them, because they understand revenge. They understand greed. They understand ambition. The kind of hunger that drives people to claw their way into their circles, to sit at their tables, to want what they have. They can process enemies who want to be them. What they cannot understand is someone who doesn't want their money, doesn't want their empire, doesn't want their seat at the table, someone who doesn't crave their life, their status, or their power, someone who only wanted them to face consequences, someone who only wanted truth to matter. That makes you unthinkable to them. You've become the one thing they cannot file away, cannot classify, cannot purchase into silence. You are their worst nightmare, because you are the anomaly in their system, the glitch in their code, the exception to every rule they live by. You can't be bought, you can't be threatened, and you can't be seduced into their game, and that makes you the most dangerous force they've ever faced. How long did you carry that weight in silence? How many nights did you lie awake staring into the dark, knowing what you knew, holding the nuclear option in your pocket, like a grenade with the pin halfway pulled? They mistook your silence for weakness. They mistook your patience for paralysis. Every day you didn't act, they convinced themselves they'd won. Every morning you woke up without dialing that number, they chalked it up as another victory. But you weren't frozen, you weren't powerless, you were doing the hardest, most excruciating thing in the world, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, waiting for the timing to line up, for the cracks to appear, for the dominoes to lean just enough that all it would take was one touch to send the whole structure collapsing. And perfect moments, like perfect phone calls, don't fall from the sky, they're engineered, and you were engineering one. Every document you saved, every recording you tucked away, every screenshot, every whispered detail, every little thread, they were all carefully stored like weapons in an invisible arsenal, while they were living their lives of excess, flying private, drinking vintages older than you, celebrating in mansions and penthouses. You were living like a spy in your own life, documenting, archiving, preparing. They hired professionals to watch you, but you were the one really watching. You studied their patterns, their rhythms, their habits of arrogance, followed by waves of paranoia. You memorized the cycles of their greed, their moments of confidence, and their inevitable lapses in judgment. You learned when they were at their strongest, but more importantly when they were exposed. You weren't just surviving, you were studying. You became a scholar of their corruption, a student of their destruction. They thought you were the hunted, when in reality you were writing the manual on how to dismantle them. They mistook you for prey, when you were quietly sharpening your teeth. And the waiting, oh the waiting, must have been unbearable. Watching them flourish while you scraped by, watching them toast champagne while you counted pennies, seeing their names celebrated in magazines, their faces plastered on covers, while you held their downfall in your back pocket, like a loaded weapon, knowing you could end it, but not yet knowing if you had the courage or the timing to do it. There must have been nights where the weight nearly broke you, moments when rage clawed at you, begging you to pull the trigger too early, to make the call out of desperation, to end the suffering before the strategy had ripened. Nights when the urge to scream, to expose, to release it all was almost too much to bear, but something in you held back. Maybe it was wisdom, maybe it was instinct, maybe it was divine timing whispering in your ear. Maybe it was that quiet, steady understanding that revenge isn't just about the strike, it's about the precision, because you knew revenge served cold isn't just a phrase, it's survival, it's impact, it's devastation, and so you waited. You let the fire burn inside you, not to consume you, but to harden you. You let patience sharpen your blade until it gleamed, and when the time finally came, you weren't just a survivor, you were something else entirely. You had become a chef of consequences. You took their cruelty, their arrogance, their greed, and you simmered it down like ingredients in a slow-cooked recipe. You measured, you stirred, you refined. Every slight, every betrayal, every humiliation, every attempt to bury you, into the pot it went, and you kept the lid on, letting it boil, letting it grow potent, letting the flavor of justice intensify, until the dish was ready to be served. And when you finally placed it before them, it was at the exact temperature to burn the deepest. They never saw it coming, because they never believed you had that kind of patience, that kind of restraint, that kind of discipline, but you did. And that's why, when the moment came, when you finally struck, it wasn't messy, it wasn't frantic, it was surgical, precise, devastating, a masterpiece years in the making. And in that moment, you weren't just delivering justice, you were rewriting the definition of power itself. They gave you so many chances to strike too soon. They dangled them in front of you like bait on a hook, hoping your hunger for justice would override your discipline. Every provocation, every humiliation, every rumor whispered into the shadows of your life, it was all engineered to make you lash out. Every smear campaign, every fake opportunity that vanished at the last second, every subtle twist of the knife in your back. They weren't just punishing you, they were testing you. They wanted you to react. They wanted you sloppy, emotional, reckless. They wanted you swinging wild, so they could step back, dodge, and counterpunch with the full weight of their money and influence. But you refused to play that role. You did something they had never seen before, something they didn't have a page for in their playbook. You absorbed it. Every insult, every attack, every attempt to corner you. You took it, you folded it, and you stored it. You didn't let it poison you with rage. You let it transform into patience, and that patience became your weapon. While they thought they were winning, you were preparing. While they thought they were breaking you, you were studying them. They never understood that every day you didn't move wasn't paralysis, it was precision being sharpened. So when you finally made your move, it wasn't born of anger or spite or desperation, it was born of calculation. The kind of calculation that only comes from years of watching, waiting, planning the perfect strike. And now let's step inside their heads for a moment. These people who spent their entire lives walking with their chests puffed out, never once glancing over their shoulders. These people who built entire empires on intimidation, who wielded legal threats like swords and financial pressure like hammers. These people who moved through the world as if consequences were things that happened to other people. For the first time they know what fear really is. Not the manufactured kind they used to sell to others. Not the staged theatrics of lawsuits, subpoenas, or headlines. Real fear. The kind that makes your hands shake at the dinner table. The kind that makes food taste like ash, no matter how much it costs. The kind that makes every phone call feel like a possible disaster. Every knock at the door sound like the end. Their fortress has become a prison. They're not sleeping well, they're not laughing the way they used to. They're conducting threat assessments right now, and not the kind they used to aim at people like you. No, now the threat assessments are about them. They're hiring new security, but not to chase enemies. They're hiring people to watch their own shadows, to watch them, because the real threat has slipped inside the walls. They're combing through their records, reviewing every deal, every contract, every offhand email, every transaction, trying desperately to calculate the damage. They're running through lists of names. Who did they betray? Who did they silence? Who did they crush on their way up? They're replaying history, terrified of who else might be inspired by what you did. And that's the real beauty of it. You didn't just make a phone call, you lit a beacon, you rang a bell that cannot be unrung. You showed the world that monsters can bleed, and when monsters bleed, people stop fearing them. You proved that they weren't untouchable, and now every single person they ever stepped on has ideas. Every former employee they dismissed becomes a potential whistleblower. Every ex-partner they cheated becomes a possible informant. Every silent witness they thought they had buried under contracts and fear is now a living, breathing threat. They're scrambling now, trying to patch the cracks. They're pushing new NDAs, desperate ones, shoving them across conference tables with trembling hands. They're moving money into shadow accounts, shifting assets overseas, preparing for wars they don't even know are coming yet. But how do you prepare for the unknown? How do you defend against a truth when you don't know how much of it has already escaped, or who else has the courage to say it out loud? You've turned their wealth into liability, their network into a web of potential betrayals. Their strength has become their weakness. Their fortune has become a trail of evidence. And here's the masterpiece: you're not even coming for them anymore. You already came. Past tense. Done. Finished. That phone call wasn't just the first shot, it was the killing blow. Everything happening now is just gravity, consequences collapsing under their own weight. They keep looking for your next move, analyzing, waiting, hiring experts to predict what you'll do next. But there isn't one. You're not playing anymore. The game ended the second you picked up the phone, and you won with one call. But you didn't just expose them, you rewrote the rules. You created a world they never thought possible. A world where their money doesn't make them safe, where their power doesn't make them untouchable, where someone like you can bring down someone like them. Welcome to their nightmare. Population them. And if they want to calculate the cost, if they want to understand what one truth is worth in their economy of lies, they'll never find it on a balance sheet. It's not measured in dollars or euros or gold or Bitcoin. The exchange rate is written in sleepless nights, in collapsing alliances, in reputations they can never rebuild. The cost is their own paranoia, eating them alive, knowing the truth they buried finally clawed its way to the surface. And it was you who set it free. It's measured in everything they thought permanent, turning temporary, in every yes man turning into a maybe, in decades of construction collapsing in days. You didn't just speak truth to power, you proved truth is its own currency, and they'd been banking counterfeit their whole lives. Now they're liquidating more than assets, they're cutting ties, burning bridges, scrambling to seal cracks in the very network that once made them powerful. Every connection feels like a leak, every ally a potential betrayal. You flipped their greatest strength into their deepest weakness, with nothing but words, true words. Their lawyers are working overtime, trying to put walls around reality, drafting cease and desists for facts. But truth isn't something you can copyright or cage. It waits, it spreads. And thanks to you, it's already out there, multiplying beyond their control. So they throw money at image repair, charity checks, PR campaigns, sudden conscience. But everyone sees the timing. Everyone knows why. Every dollar they donate, every speech they give, is just another confession. They're not rebuilding a reputation. They're erecting a monument to the truth you exposed. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the growth of my faith. Help me trust you even when physical evidence is lacking. Let me believe in your perpetual presence, knowing you will never harm me. I understand that your thoughts for me are thoughts of prosperity and not harm, to give me a good future. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer up this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am grateful for your presence in my life and the abundance you bring. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you'd like to support our work, please